I'm sitting there in early 2013 and I'm thinking, okay, I understand the problem now, but I have no idea how this is going to be resolved. And again, I'm doing the mental connection to the Father, and I'm assuming he's listening, because when I said, please, can you give me some idea of how this is going to be resolved? Because I personally don't see us fixing the problem. Okay. And almost immediately I started to get a download, and this has never happened before. It was almost instantaneous. I was getting a message back, was waves of energy were going to wash over the planet. That would amplify everyone's consciousness, and that would cause everything. That's a huge word. I didn't realize what that meant at the time. Everything was going to be revealed to everyone so that they could make a well-informed decision as to whether or not they wanted to go down the path of light or continue down the path of darkness with these fallen angels. And what was weird about it too is I saw a lot of people dying of heart attacks, which I thought was because they were just they couldn't handle the stress of it. The shock was too great. Now I know better. This is what I was shown. The reason I was shown it in that way was, you must prepare yourself, because people that you know and love are going to make these choices, and it's not up to you. It's going to be very difficult for you to watch them make the choices, but that is because of free will. That's their choice, not yours. And you have to respect that, even if you don't agree with it. And it's very painful. and okay, so intellectually in 2013, I see this happening and I'm like kind of freaked out by it, but it hadn't happened yet. And I said, oh, okay, I'll mentally prepare myself. You can't. I thought I could, but honestly, I really wasn't prepared for this stuff to happen, especially to my dad. But, obviously it's happening all over the world. This is huge for us here. This is a major shift that we're going through. Oh, and the other thing was, I found after that download, I actually found scientific papers that said, yes, there's waves of energy hitting the planet. They don't even know where it's coming from. Just to cap this, it's between 2013 and 2022 is a 10-year weird window. And that's basically the time frame we had to make our individually, collectively, that's as much time as we were going to be given to make the choice. Basically, by next year, that window is closed. That's my interpretation of what I was shown. I could be wrong.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Robert Stanley to Exopolitics Today, and he has really an amazing story, both in terms of his personal experiences and research concerning UFOs in the Washington, D.C. area. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, I know it's always helpful for my audience to learn a little bit about the guest. So, how did you kind of professionally begin your work? I know you did some work as an investigative journalist, but you began as a security guard. So why don't you kind of tell us what happened after you kind of left high school, if you went to college and that sort of thing?
Now, actually, I traveled quite a bit when I was younger. So by the time that I was supposed to graduate from high school, I would have been very much behind. I literally missed a lot of school. I had to do like correspondence courses and stuff while I was overseas. I was based in Malibu. That's where I grew up. And so my parents traveled a lot, and I had to travel with them because I was very young. I started traveling overseas at age 12. And even prior to that, we were traveling in the country because my father was an artist. My mom was a pianist. And so we had to travel. Anyway, by the time I was in my 20s, I was still living in Malibu, and I was one of the jobs that I had was working security at one of the private beaches there. And so that's where things really started to get bizarre for me, even though I'd had other unusual, supernatural, or what do you call, extraordinary experiences in places like Egypt and other places. But anyway, Malibu was where things really started to change, and specifically 1985, when I saved a young boy's life while I was working security at the beach. And during the process, I saw entities that were in the room, apparently tormenting the boy. And when I intervened, the reason I was there was actually because the boy was bleeding to death. He'd ran face first into a sliding glass door. And so I ran over there quickly. I mean, this is not part of my job, but I just instinctively ran over there and called paramedics. And in the process, that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. Aside from the fact that the boy was bleeding to death, there was some interdimensional entities in the room. Now, at the time, I didn't know anything about the other dimensions and these parasitic entities. The Gnostics called them archons. So that got my attention, because then they started coming after me at that particular day. And it was an equinox, and I went up on the mountain that night and I started praying, and I had an out-of-body experience, and I entered a realm of light, and I met a being who said he was my father. And it really shocked me. It changed everything about the way I saw myself and the world. And it took me decades to come to any kind of conclusion about what all that means. But when I went back to that location in the mountains in 1985, that's when I discovered that there was actually ancient megalithic ruins up there, probably from Lemuria. Maybe it's Atlantean. I don't know, because there's no records. There's absolutely zero records of who built those. Well, they're megalithic statues now, but the odd part, Michael, is that growing up, I had many times I had lucid dreams of being up in those mountains, in amongst those stone facility, but it wasn't ruined. In my mind, in my journeys, I guess, in the astral realm, they were still intact, and there was people there, and we were being educated on, well, I don't know exactly what. I can't tell you, but it certainly wasn't the normal curriculum that you get in a school. It definitely felt like a school.
So that experience with the beings there in Malibu, in that mountainous area, I mean, you mentioned in one of your interviews with the Leak Project that being was a shining one and said he was your father, and you kind of couldn't work that out. So do you
Right.
have, want to explain exactly how that being looked and why you thought that he was your father, or maybe couldn't be, but yet was?
Yeah, I mean, I have a biological father, so that didn't really make a lot of sense. What he was, and besides, okay, so when I was out of body, I was in this realm of light, and in the distance, I saw this object moving closer towards me. So naturally, I'm focused on it. And as it got closer, I could see it was an incredibly bright, radiant light. And it was in the light was a form of a human being that looked prototypically like Jesus, the long hair, the beard, and some sort of luminous robe. And yet, and what really freaked me out was that there was light literally coming out of his, not only his entire body, but out of his eyes. And so naturally, my question was, who is this? I was just thinking that to myself. And then he said, I'm your father. And I said, he either said, I'm your father, or I am the father. It was also shocking to me. All those events together in that one little space of time were very transformative and shocking. I don't know what else to say about it, but stunning, I guess. So the next thing I knew, I was literally back in my body, and I thought like maybe a few minutes had gone by. I mean, I didn't think I was asleep. And when I sat back up, I realized that hours had gone by, because the position of the moon when I laid down to rest was over my head. And then when I woke up or sat up, it was now setting on the horizon, which meant that hours had gone by. I usually don't wear a watch. I'm not a big fan of watches, so I tend to go by other things. And anyway, it was a series of events that I could not fathom what was going on at the time. And that's why it took me decades to even come to any kind of conclusions. And even so, as you'd asked me off air, what is my relationship with Enki? I don't know. I don't think I've ever met him. Although there was a period of time when I was reading the Wes Penray papers that I thought it probably was Enki, the way that Wes Penray was presenting him, and that, you know, the history of this world, because he does fall into that category of being a shining one. Most all of the Anunnaki are. That's according to what I've read recently. That's what the name Anunnaki actually translates to, is the shining ones. So now here's the other thing. After I went back to that specific location, I was looking for this individual, this entity who said he was my father. And instead what I found was these ancient ruins. And I kept going there and then I started having close encounters with UFOs by myself and with other people. And now this is right above Point Magoo Naval Base there in Oxnard, California. It's right next to, as you travel north from Malibu, that is what you'll find is Oxnard is the next city. And Point Magoo Naval Base was absolutely huge. And they have a history there of UFO activity. Major Donald Kehoe actually had mentioned this on the record, that when they first put in the radar systems, because it's a missile tracking center for the Pacific, you know, they'd launch them from Vandenberg, and then Point Magoo would track the missiles as they went all the way over to, I think it's Kwajalein. Anyway, Kehoe had said that when they put the first radars in there, they would literally burn out as these UFOs would pass over them at incredible speeds, with obviously emitting a tremendous amount of energy. It would overload the systems of the radars there, which were directly right below where I was started having these encounters in 1985, and went on for a series of years.
That's very interesting. I actually spent a little bit of time with Alex Collier. You may know of him, and I know he lived in the Malibu area, and he had his quite a few contact experiences in the mountain area of Malibu. I think it was Decker Canyon that the Andromedans landed and picked him up, and he had contact experiences there. So kind of quite interesting that area of Malibu, those mountains and canyons there, a lot of people have had contacts.
Yeah, it's actually part of the community that they really don't talk about it much. I mean, we've talked about it amongst ourselves. And yes, I did meet Alex Collier there about, I think it was 1980, late 85, early 86. And we became friends. We shared a lot of information and had some experiences together up there in those mountains. But that Malibu is actually very much a UFO hotspot. And I think it was Jimmy Church in 2004 that broke the story of, allegedly on Google Earth, that there was some sort of UFO base under the water right there at Point Magoo. But I later was doing some analysis on, actually I found it before Jimmy, but I just didn't publicize it because I couldn't really see it very well, at least not the way that he and his colleagues presented it, in such a way that it looked like something out of the Flintstones or something. A lot of that, though, is actually a distortion of the map, because those are not real photographs. Those are like computer generated images of data that it's from satellites. It's not a real photograph. So, and when you tilt the entire map, it distorts things considerably. So contours in the cliffs there, and it is fascinating. And it is right adjacent to, directly in front of, as you go west towards the ocean. Yes, west. The so-called UFO base is right below where we were having all those UFO encounters in the mountains where there's, these ancient megalithic ruins. So I was intrigued by the whole process, but there's no way to prove that there's a UFO base. There's a lot of rumors, even before Jimmy Church put that stuff out there, that the rumors were that there's lava tubes that the Navy has been accessing for God knows how long, and using them to transit from the coastline inland to the Mojave Desert.
So you had some common experiences with Alex there in Malibu regarding UFOs. I mean, he says he had encounters with Andromedans. Did you ever see anything like that, or were you kind of like seeing just lights in the sky and that sort of thing?
Well, no, sometimes they beamed the light on us when we were up at this particular spot. Okay, yes. Okay, I'm going to say something here. I'm going to apologize up front if I offend anybody, but Alex, if you're watching this, I'm sorry that you and I had to butt heads over various things in the past. I do still consider you a friend, and I love you, and I'm glad I was there that night to save your life. I would not change a thing. I just wish that we could still be friends. I just hope this message gets to you, and I'm hoping that you are well and your family as well. That's all I can say about it at this point.
Okay, well, you have this encounter in March of 1985 with a Shining One, an out-of-body experience, and you continue to kind of travel, see the world. You're very interested in mysteries, and then you begin working as a journalist. So you want to kind of tell us a little bit about how you kind of began to work in the media industry after 85?
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to do this at all. I was researching. In fact, Alex and I were sharing a lot of information back in the late 80s. But I ended up diverging into a different path, and obviously he did as well. But we both read a lot. And I began actually starting to talk to people just like he did. But eventually I went to a UFO conference or meeting. It was a meeting. It wasn't a full-blown conference, but it was a meeting in West Los Angeles. And I forget who the featured speaker was that night, but it was a place where like William Cooper had spoken, and it was called U-Forum. That's what it was. Penny Harper was the coordinator. And that night I met a woman who had just come back from Peru and had close encounters there. And she'd started a magazine called Unicus. And so she and I met, and she talked about her experiences. She basically, briefly, she introduced herself and the magazine, that this was something she was tasked to do by benevolent extraterrestrials. At least that's the way she presented it. And that so that she was looking for submissions to this new magazine, and I offered to write an article about the close encounters that I'd had up in Malibu and in these ancient ruins. So when I met her, I really don't want to say her name now because she's working in the corporate world, but that's how Unicus magazine got started. That's how I met my wife. We ended up getting married in very short order. And that's how I ended up working as the editor for Unicus magazine in print for from late 1990 up until sometime in, I think it was 95. And then we had a son, and I ended up going to work in a corporate setting. She'd already been working in the corporate world for many years. And I mean, her first job out of college was Madison Avenue in advertising. And it was a big switch for her to go from manipulating people to buy things that were obviously not good for them, like alcohol and soda and cigarettes and all that garbage, to publishing a magazine about benevolent extraterrestrials. I mean, there's some parallel connectivity there, but in other words, it was a huge transformation for her. By the time I met her, she was a very different person, and I was evolving as well. So again, I'm just trying to answer your question. I wasn't planning on being a journalist or an editor. I didn't know what I was going to do, Michael, honestly, because my life was so unusual, because I traveled so much. I broke with my peers. I didn't have the traditional education that most people have. I was more self-educated. I still am. I still read voluminous amounts of material every day and analyze it and try to come to some conclusions, or at least some awareness of who we are, where we are, and why, why all this is existing. So Unicus actually was in print, and then at some point we put it to rest for various reasons. And then in 1999, I started the website unicusmagazine.com. That is now gone because of the censorship and other peer pressure that's being placed upon everyone who's anyone in the media. That, we have to submit to the current powers that be. Otherwise, we'll be censored or punished in other ways.
Well, that takes me to the question about the powers that be. Now, you've talked a bit about the fallen angels, or the fallen Anunnaki, or the lower tier shining ones. So you want to tell us, who are they?
Okay, well, it depends who you ask or who you read. I mean, Sitchin has his version. Michael Heiser has his. The books that I read recently I found fascinating are by a guy named Christian O'Brien. He's deceased now, but he and his wife, Barbara Joy, wrote a series of books, and the final one is a compilation of all their research. It's called The Shining Ones by Christian O'Brien. I was promoting that for quite some time, and I still feel it's worth reading. But I've long felt that we don't have access to all the information about them and even ourselves, because if you accept what's written in some of these books by different authors and researchers, is that there's an ongoing conflict amongst the Anunnaki. And you can oversimplify it, I think, by saying, oh, it's just between Enki and Lil. I disagree. I mean, it seems to me it's a lot more complicated than that. Wow. So in the book, The Shining Ones by Mr. O'Brien, it gives you a different perspective from somebody like Mr. Sitchin, who I think is, I liked him. I corresponded with him. We talked on the phone. I actually met him once. I showed him one of the artifacts I found in Malibu, and he was very surprised. I actually was gifted a Sumerian cylinder seal that was made in Malibu by a secret society there. And it's the 3 belt stars of Orion. And what he told me was, oh, you must find more of these. And I said, I didn't even find this. It was a gift. It found me. And it took me years to understand what it was, actually, because those things are not known to be in existence in the Americas. Anyway, it's a very complicated, and it's not even a story. It's a history, which is extremely convoluted, because if I read this correctly, this ongoing conflict, let's call it a civil war amongst these Anunnaki that have come here. The first casualty of war is always truth. And the winner of any particular conflict usually writes the history. So one side says this, one side says that. It's really hard to tell for sure which is accurate. But to try and answer your question, according to Mr. O'Brien, there's different levels or tiers within the Anunnaki society. So you have the royalty all the way down to the servants, and which would explain why they were tasked or ordered to mine gold under the ground, or according to Mr. O'Brien, they actually were doing other hard labor as well, and they rebelled against it. I think it's a little more complicated than that, but I can't even address it right now. But in any case, there was one rebellion at Mount Hermon. Some of the lower ranking Anunnaki were imprisoned for their insubordination. Then there was new recruits brought in from from the lower level, the lower tier of the society. They were brought in to do this as replacements, to do heavy labor. And they rebelled as well. In the interim, supposedly we were created. Now, again, this is according to Mr. O'Brien's interpretation, which I find fascinating, and probably a little more inclusive or expansive compared to Sitchin and Heiser, because those guys are more focused on a more specific. They're not as holistic as Mr. O'Brien, in my opinion. So there was an agreement made with the new recruits that came in that they would, they being the higher ranking ones, Anu and his sons, Enlil, Enki, that whole administration, Anunnaki administration here, said that they would create another worker to help alleviate the labor. And that seemed to appease those that were in rebellion at that time. So the first iteration of us was a worker, not, and it didn't say, you know, Mr. Bryan doesn't say anything about mining gold. It was something, it was another level of construction that was going on specifically on Mount Hermon, which, by the way, is a UNESCO site. You can't even go up there right now without permission, at least not on the very top. And they've never really done proper archaeological excavations there that I'm aware of. There's something weird about all of this and what the secrecy. And I do think that the conversation we're having here would probably explain why disclosure is not forthcoming from any government agency on this planet, because it's not simply saying we're not alone. There's a whole backstory there that is very complex, and it's also putting us at a position of servitude. And I think that would be, at least for the powers that be, like the so-called government, whether it be the government we see or this shadow government that everybody talks about, there's that would make them look inept or weak and subservient to these other beings, which would completely upset society. And I think they've known that. If you read the Brookings Institute, their briefing on to NASA in its early phases was, as you venture out there, the manned space program is probably going, or I think they said that you're going to find artifacts and or extraterrestrials as you move out there. And you shouldn't disclose that directly to the public, because it has the potential of destabilizing society. And I tend to agree with that. I don't like the secrecy. I think that's kind of idiotic. There's got to be a way to educate us and bring us up to the next level. And again, this goes back to this conflict. The government itself cannot disclose everything, because without the participation of these Anunnaki themselves directly addressing us, not through intermediaries, but directly. And you know, they have the technology if they wanted to, if they felt it was necessary. Apparently they don't feel it's necessary. And so we're being kept in the dark regarding this matter. And it's very frustrating.
Well, you mentioned Mount Hermon, and that, of course, is the place where the 200 fallen angels were landed. It's described in the book of Genesis, book of Jubilees, and the book of Enoch goes into a lot more detail into it. Right. And so, you know, these fallen angels, you're saying that they are a rebel group or a lower rank of the Anunnaki. And the first group of Anunnaki that rebelled were I think you pronounce it Igigi, and that's mentioned in the Atrahasis that they rebelled. So you're saying that the fallen angels that are described in the book of Enoch and the book of Genesis were in fact these Igigi Anunnaki.
Yeah, that's what Mr. O'Brien says, that they are the direct translation of Anunnaki means the shining ones, Elohim, angel, and I'm probably forgetting one of the other, but the bottom line is they have, these are not really names. They're more like titles or descriptions of these individuals and or their society, which obviously has been put here. And it is imperfect, clearly. They have issues. And we tend to be, I think, we're basically caught in the middle between these fallen ones, the rebels, and the leadership. So it's the thing is, you know, the rebels have a point, I'm sure, from their perspective. They feel like they've been wronged. But the behavior that they engaged in and are still engaging in behind the scenes is very detrimental to not only themselves, but us. And this is in the book, The Shining Ones. And again, it's quoting from those sources that you're talking about and more about how the flood is only after the fact. What originally happened during the second rebellion, and again, those 200, they weren't fallen when they arrived at Mount Hermon. They were replacements. They were new recruits. They rebelled later because they just didn't like the conditions. It was apparently an armed rebellion, and they didn't commit any violence that I'm aware of, but it so upset the administration that they imprisoned some of them. And but eventually there was an agreement. There was some sort of peace agreement there that we would be created as the intermediary or the worker. We would be assisting them. So after we were created, part of the assignment or the expectation of the higher ranking Anunnaki, they said to the lower ranking ones, we made them to work with you, to help you, but you must care for them. You must watch over them. And instead, if I read this correctly, again, I apologize if I'm upsetting anybody, but I'm just here trying to relate that they took advantage of us, according to the Book of Enoch, which again is not, and it's not complete. I'm sure there's more to it, and it's probably been censored or edited. But it says in there that they gave us weapons of war and showed us how to use them. They gave us pharmacopoeia. They taught the women how to wear jewelry and makeup, and so it was a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, if I understand it correctly. But this really upset the higher ranking Anunnaki, and that's where the punishment really started to get severe. And they even told Enoch, you need to go explain it to them. I'm not giving them clemency or mercy. It's like you really screwed up. We gave you a very simple assignment. We made these assistant workers for you to help our whole society evolve. I mean, it wasn't just for them, by the way. Again, from the book, The Shining Ones, they're talking about some sort of upgrade that they were engaging in, advancing the primitive life forms that were here. So it wasn't like they were just exploiting us. Supposedly we were very primitive when they first showed up many thousands of years ago. I should say our ancestors were very primitive. And then when they hybridized us by blending their genetics with ours, and teaching us stuff, the goal was to make us like a fourth tier, the fourth level of Anunnaki society. That's where we should have been, but obviously that didn't work out. And so I'm going to just summarize now, because this is really we're getting into the heart of the matter. After the rebellion, and we were created, and then they started teaching us basically how to misbehave and serve them directly, as opposed to serving the higher ranking Anunnaki. The punishment was imprisonment for the leadership of the so-called 200 fallen angels. And also they had to watch as their offspring, because at that point they started mating with our ancestors, the new hybrid, newly created Adama. And they started making families, and I'm not sure exactly how they induced them to murder each other, but it probably was ionized radiation or some other remote mechanism that they used to cause us, our ancestors, to literally attack and kill each other. That was part of the punishment, not only for us, but for these so-called fallen angels. And then comes the flood. Now, all of that, depending on who you read or which source you go to, is very, it's confusing, to say the least, misleading. We really don't know. That's why I'm just prefacing this, because when I was reading this book and my wife was reading it, she asked me a very important question. So how did this, if it was completely erased and they were incarcerated, the fallen angels were incarcerated, how come it's like we're back there again? How did that all happen? And I hadn't really thought of that question, but once it entered my mind, there was an answer there, which shocked me. I mean, it was almost instantaneous. It wasn't as though I needed to create an answer. It suddenly was in my mind that they were the higher ranking Anunnaki. We're talking about a society, a family, multiple families making up this society. They decided to give the lower ranking ones a second chance to do things right, correctly. Okay. And clearly they didn't. And a new group of us, the Homo sapiens, were created again so when I say they gave them a second chance, they literally, after all of that, they reconstituted this process, including more of the Adamas. And then they let out these fallen angels and said, hey, here's your opportunity. Show us that you can follow the orders and we'll give you clemency. It didn't work that way.
Okay, so just to kind of like try to get a handle on what you've described and what the historic texts say. So we know that according to the historic texts, Enki creates the first humans, Adama, around 300,000 BC, after the first rebellion of the Igigi, and humans were created as kind of like a support. And then subsequent to that, the Igigi were kind of put in a position of custodianship over humanity, and they were supposed to kind of like steward us to make sure that we did things properly, so that the higher level Anunnaki would get whatever it was that they wanted, gold or whatever they wanted. But they messed up. And so then they were imprisoned. That's the Book of Enoch,
right?
Describing another group coming in, another group of Igigi coming in, new recruits to kind of like oversee humanity. They mess up as well. There's the flood, and then after the flood, the surviving humans have to kind of like work with the surviving Igigi, who are now, I assume, going to become the kind of ruling class or the secret shadow government behind the scenes. Is that kind of pretty much what you were trying to express?
Right. Except I don't accept that everything was just put into an ark or a boat. I mean, because that really doesn't address where do the fallen angels come, how did they come back into a position of power if they were imprisoned? I mean, and besides, it was, okay, so the geneticists like Enki would have had a way of reconstituting pretty much everything. The question is, was there the will or the authority to do that? And it certainly wouldn't be coming from the fallen ones, the lower ranking ones. It had to come from the higher ranking ones, the authorities of that society. And again, I'm just going to, yes, you're right. That's a good summary, but I'm trying to make a specific distinction about the way it all unfolded, because we are not being given the full story. And apparently we don't need to know. And from their perspective, if I understand this correctly, they don't really, we know that the lower ranking ones don't think of us as, what do they call us? The Lulu, the worker. We weren't designed to be allegedly to be co-equal with these higher ranking ones, or even the lower ranking ones. And that's why it's so easy for them to manipulate us on some level.
So then with the higher ranking Anunnaki, I mean, there's always been this interpretation, and Sitchin kind of talked about it, and others have talked about it, this rivalry between Enki and Enlil, which was kind of like a power struggle.
Yeah.
But beyond that power struggle, you also have a class struggle,
right,
between the family of Anu, Enki, Enlil, and the working Anunnaki, the Igigi. So it's kind of like you got different types of conflicts going on. But essentially, then it sounds like this lower class of Anunnaki, the Igigi, or the fallen angels, that they've kind of like been left behind on the planet, and that the upper class kind of on their flagship Nibiru, or maybe they have more than one flagship or planet, that they come and go and they kind of look at what's happened, and they maybe release some groups that have been behaving, or maybe they begin to imprison others that have misbehaved, that they kind of pass judgment, and then they go away and come back after so many thousands of years. And in the meantime, they're kind of watching this experiment on the planet Earth unfold with us, the Lulu in their eyes, and the Igigi, they're kind of subservient Anunnaki that are there to kind of like exercise some control or some responsibility over us.
Hey, it's fine for us to have this conversation, but can you imagine? I mean, it's come a long way. The Congress is now at least admitting that these things exist on some level in a very convoluted manner. Of course, with plausible deniability, they don't want to take any responsibility for any of this stuff, right? And I can kind of understand why, but can you imagine if in the mainstream media, which some people are enamored with, they literally look to the so-called authority figures to tell them what's real and what isn't. If this level of conversation or disclosure actually were to become mainstream, some people would really lose it. I think because their paradigm would be so shattered, it'd be difficult for them to pick up the pieces and then carry on. And so I kind of think that's why we're still being treated this way collectively.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of people that are more secular, their world will collapse because it'll just be so beyond them. But I think a lot of the evangelical or Christian or Muslim or the Hindus, they'll just take it in stride, because they say, "Oh yeah, this is all in our sacred texts. Yeah, we read about this when we were kids. We know all about Enoch and the fallen angels, and Semjase leading the fallen angels. Yeah, but we know all this."
Right. But okay, but if we were given it again, and this is why, without them, the Anunnaki, being part of the process of disclosure or conversation, and engaging them directly is going to be shocking to everybody. It doesn't matter how much context or preparation that even people like ourselves who've been doing a lot of research and having experiences with them to some degree, it's still collectively going to be a major transition for us. And I'm not sure when that's going to happen, or even if it's going to happen. Maybe they prefer to keep us like this.
Well, that's an interesting question. I know you've been talking about 2013 to 2022 being a critical window, that this is a time of us either kind of like transforming into something like a shining ones ourselves, or some kind of planetary catastrophe. So were you kind of told that? How did you find out about that time window? Because we're right at the end of it now.
I know. So that's going back to the connection that I established back in 1985, maintained it to some degree with this individual who claimed he was my father. So and even in 2011, when I finally got to a point where I asked him mentally, telepathy, whatever you want to call that, I asked him specifically about that boy and other people who have these encounters with so-called demons or archons or whatever, a possession. possession by parasitic entities. I said, you know, I'm kind of at a brick wall here. I don't understand. I need some clarity. Can you help put this into context? And I don't try and ask trivial things of him, because I'm sure he's very busy, but he's clearly a very bright and intelligent individual. So the information started coming to me after I made that request, but it was gradual. It was day by day for the next 2 weeks or so, until finally I was in the shower one morning and suddenly I thought, man, I've seen pictures of those things before. It was Trevor James Constable. When he was still alive in California, he was taking pictures using infrared film of these objects. He called them sky critters. And I'm like, oh my God, yes. So again, suddenly it all started to come in as I'd requested. It started to come into focus. And then I wrote an article with those pictures, and quite a bit of information actually just flowed through me. Even Carlos Castaneda's, I'd read him years before, but suddenly I was seeing it like with a whole new what do you call them? He had a name for them, flyers. Everybody seems to have another name for these entities, but the bottom line is I put together this article and I tentatively shared it with some people. And I thought, oh, well, this answers the question, but I'm not sure I want to be the one that's out there putting out that this information is not going to go well with people. I think it's going to upset a lot of people. Even if they really need to know it, I think it's going to be very unpopular. I was a little uncomfortable being the messenger. All right. So I said, once again, I dialed up the father figure, whatever. And I said, if you really want me to bring this story out, please give me a sign that this is what you want. And shortly after that, I got a phone call from the producer at Coast to Coast AM, who I already knew because of my other work investigating UFO activity in Washington, D.C. And normally we book shows, you know, at least a few days, if not a couple weeks out. And I said, hi, what's up? And she says, George's dad died today. I said, oh, that's terrible. And she says, I need somebody tonight. Can you come on tonight? Well, that had never happened before. I said, okay, sure. What are we talking about? She goes, well, what do you have? I was like, well, hang on now. Let me email you this thing. And she took a look. I said, you see that? And she goes, yeah. She goes, we're doing it. And I said, well, hold on now. Are you sure? She said, yes, we're doing this. I'll have so-and-so contact you. We're on. That's it. She just wanted it overdone, whatever. And after I hung up, I was like, oh, I remembered what I said, you know, is this what you want me to do? Give me a sign. Well, that's the biggest audience for this kind of information on the whole planet. And I spoke to George. Obviously, he was a wreck, but we walked it through it. And he said at one point, he says to me, Robert, this is the scariest thing I've ever heard. And I said, George, the fact that we're having this conversation now is a very, very healthy sign. I mean, so you can't treat an illness unless you know you are sick. And essentially, these things are making us ill spiritually and physically. They're affecting us terribly, and most of us have no idea. So this is actually a very healthy thing that we're doing this. After the show, I was inundated with email from all over the place, all over the planet. And a lot of people were very thankful that we were finally bringing it out, that they knew because they had experiences in their family or personally, whatever. So the dam burst right there, 2011. And I was grateful to an extent. I mean, it's a blessing, but it's also a burden, I guess, to some degree. It accelerated the conflict. Once I became aware of them, they knew that I knew, and they were not happy at all, because it isn't just the lower ranking fallen angels. There's another component to all this, Michael, and that's why I'm bringing it up. Some people call it Waitiko, or however you want to look at it. There's a negative non-physical component to the problem here. And I'm sure it's not just affecting our thought process, I'm sure it's affecting the lower ranking Anunnaki as well. And that's why they're in that position, is they're like a spiritual parasite, basically, has entered their soul or spirit, however you want to look at it. No, I'm getting to the point here, right? So all that transpires 2011, 2012, whatever. And I'm sitting there in early 2013 and I'm thinking, okay, I understand the problem now, but I have no idea how this is going to be resolved. And again, I'm doing the mental connection to the Father, and I'm assuming he's listening, because when I said, please, can you give me some idea of how this is going to be resolved? Because I personally don't see us fixing the problem. Okay. And almost immediately, I started to get a download. And I think this is how telepathy really works, is it's not just a voice. It's visual, it's emotional. And yes, you may hear something, but again, it's all very interpretive. Like anything, you read a book, you watch a movie, you're going to interpret it through your own personal lens. But I did ask, and this has never happened before. It was almost instantaneous. I was getting a message back, was waves of energy were going to wash over the planet. That would amplify everyone's consciousness, and that would cause everything. That's a huge word. I didn't realize what that meant at the time. Everything was going to be revealed to everyone, so that they could make a well-informed decision as to whether or not they wanted to go down the path of light or continue down the path of darkness with these fallen angels. And what was weird about it too, is I saw a lot of people dying of heart attacks, which I thought was because they were just, they couldn't handle the stress of it. The shock was too great. Now I know better. But whoever was sending me this information clearly knew what was coming. And I'm sure they've had a hand in it to some degree, based on what we know about their activities in the past. I'm assuming that it's benevolent. It's not pleasant, though, being in our position in the midst of all this. It's very, very, very disconcerting.
Yeah, that that kind of download you got about the future, and possibility of us making that choice of walking the path of light,
Right.
darkness, and the kind of heart attacks that suddenly would emerge. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that now with the Florida Surgeon General,
Right,
coming out, and
so many others
University coming out with the increase in heart risk for those that take a certain recommended health action. I won't say anything more about that.
Yeah, Michael, it happened to my father. My biological father went through that process, and he passed away this year from heart failure. So this is what I was shown. The reason I was shown it in that way was, you must prepare yourself, because people that you know and love are going to make these choices, and it's not up to you. It's going to be very difficult for you to watch them make the choices, but that is because of free will. That's their choice, not yours. And you have to respect that, even if you don't agree with it. And it's very painful. and okay, so intellectually in 2013, I see this happening, and I'm like kind of freaked out by it, but it hadn't happened yet. And I said, oh, okay, I'll mentally prepare myself. You can't. I thought I could, but honestly, I really wasn't prepared for this stuff to happen, especially to my dad. But, obviously it's happening all over the world. This is huge for us here. This is a major shift that we're going through. Oh, and the other thing was, I found after that download, I actually found scientific papers that said, yes, there's waves of energy hitting the planet. They don't even know where it's coming from. Now, you could say that, gee, that's a weird coincidence, Robert. If you want to look at it that way, yeah, but I see it as more confirmation that whoever was giving me that insight really was being honest about it, you know? Oh, so it was between just to cap this, it was between 2013 and 2022 is a 10-year weird window. And that's basically the time frame we had to make our individually, collectively, that's as much time as we were going to be given to make the choice. Basically, by next year, that window is closed. That's my interpretation of what I was shown. I could be wrong.
Well, I think I'd love to kind of go into that a little more, but before we go there, I think it'd be worth to just say a little bit about these two books that you wrote, one in 2006 and the other in 2011, where you were focusing on UFO sightings in the Washington, D.C. area. So was this motivated by your kind of understanding that these fallen angels, Igigi, lower class Anunnaki were operating behind the scenes?
Not at all. At that point, even though I'd already read Sitchin, I'd met him, I was aware of that. But in spring of 2005, I got an email from Daryl Sims. He's the alien hunter, so-called. I knew Daryl. I'd known him for a while, and he sent me an email with pictures of UFOs swarming over the Capitol. One had actually landed on the Capitol roof. And he said to me, Robert, can you give me your opinion? Do these look real? Are they genuine? And now, of course, at that point, 2005, pretty much everybody knows Photoshop. And I'm thinking, it could be anything. Because the events took place in July 16th of 2002. So by the time I hear about them in 2005, I mean, I'm looking at the pictures and I'm thinking, if this really happened, why hasn't anybody reported it? So fortunately, the contact information for the photographer was in the email that Daryl sent to me. I called him up, he picked up the phone, and we've been in communication ever since. But what he told me was this incredible story of how he was there that night with a high-end professional Nikon equipment. He was doing a photo shoot for an album cover for a local recording artist. And they were there between 11 and like 1 at night. And he was using film, 35 millimeter analog film for the photo shoot. So, because, the question comes up, could there be distortion? And he said, absolutely not. These are not lens flares because I was using the Nikkor distortion-free glass. And I came to understand that later. It's super expensive and it's amazing the level of technology. And for anybody who knows about photography, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For those who don't, like if you had a cheap pair of glasses and it's distorted and smudged, you'd know it. But if you have like Zeiss lenses or something, you can walk outside and everything's like crystal clear. Well, that's what these lenses are like. When it says distortion free, that's why they cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Okay, it's a process. Anyway, he's there. He takes the pictures. Of course, he's focused on doing the job, but you get here, and this whole backstory is really quite phenomenal too. Prior to that, he'd spent 14 years working at ABC News, running a team of people doing audio-visual work for ABC News in Washington, D.C., including the Capitol, the White House, Air Force One, Marine One. He comes from a prestigious military family. This is not just some guy off the street with the camera just like taking pictures. There was a real, the context I thought was, it lended a lot of credibility to the story behind the photos. So eventually, I got back to Daryl and I said, man, did you even talk to this guy? And he said, no. And I'm like, well, okay, I hope you're sitting down, because Daryl's retired military. He used to be a military police officer before he went into the CIA. And I started telling him this stuff. He goes, well, damn, Robert. He goes, you got to get those things analyzed. And I said, now, wait a second. I was just an innocent bystander. And suddenly now we're going the next step. And I feel like I'm being sucked into this, but Okay, fine. That's perfectly logical. Makes sense. I asked the photographer, is it okay? Can we do that? He said, yeah, but I'm not surrendering those things for a minute. I'm going to be standing right there as a technician analyzes the negatives, which he'd actually turned into positives, I believe. I could be wrong. Well, that's how you make slides. Anyway, you take a negative and you turn it into that's just what they call it. Anyway, it's a process. He took the actual film to a film lab in Washington, D.C., directly across from the FBI. And they used that lab for developing their film. So it seemed like a good enough thing. I had the photographer record the conversation of the analysis. I then later called the analyst, the film analyst, technician, and I spoke to him. I said, hey, I'm listening to a recording of you. Is that really you? Did you say that? And he said, yes, but don't put my name on the record. I don't know what that is. All I know is it wasn't added after the fact. It's a very powerful light source or sources, and that's all I can tell you. And I thought, okay, well, then now we've got a story. I don't know. I can't answer all the questions that are going to come up around this, because obviously those things should not be in that controlled or prohibited airspace over the Capitol, or let alone touching down on the roof. No way. No way. According to our laws, especially after 9/11, and this is, remember, that was September 2001. This was July of 2002. That shouldn't have happened, but it did. And the film proves it. Film. And so I took it from there. I published the article with the photographs in Nexus magazine, as well as on my website. And I had done a brief interview with the Capitol Police Public Relations Department. And I just said, look, I'm going to run this article. There's an incident that took place. We have photographs. I just want to give you guys an opportunity to come on the record and make a statement. And it was very short and sort of like robotic, but I got him to come on the record. A week after that was published, I got visited at my home by a black helicopter. Now, I live in just a regular civilian neighborhood in the South Bay of Southern Torrance area, actually, at the time, Southern California, Los Angeles, South Bay. And the helicopter came to my house, started doing maneuvers over the house, shaking the entire house. Naturally, I was there. Fortunately, my wife and son were not. But I came outside as it was hovering over the driveway, low enough that I could have hit it with like a baseball, easy. And it was completely tinted, black, loud as hell. And I'm looking up at them, and obviously they were looking at me, probably taking, movies or pictures or something. And I had the presence of mind to run into the house and come back out and take a picture of them as they were leaving. Well, I'm telling you this because unintended consequences was this. Yes, I was intimidated. It scared the crap out of me. But then I realized, wait a second, they clearly know who I am and what I'm doing now, and they're upset the fact that I'm investigating something that they don't want to have to answer for, whoever they are. Okay, I would find out later, but it's just to make the story simple. It motivated me to go looking, because everybody knows about what happened in 1952. It's on the public record. They showed up at least 2 or 3 times, according to the major mainstream media. And I remember that, but so I started with that. And then I just kept looking and looking, because I'd already done professional research. At that point, I'd been working for Honda Research and Development, writing reports for them. Like a corporate journalist, basically, is what I'd done. As I wrapped up Unicus in print, I needed a job. So that's what happened. I ended up working for Honda. And so I had an idea of how to do real in-depth research and create a timeline. So the reason that's important is you can start to analyze spikes in the data over time. And that gives you some indication of the level of activity It doesn't explain everything, but it's a baseline. It's a start. So that's what I did. And I quickly found 100 reports from 1850 to 2005. And I thought, wait a minute, how come, if that's really going on, how come nobody's talking about it like this? I mean, the way we're talking about. And then so I went a little deeper, and eventually I found, I think it was a little around 200 reports. And I thought, okay, I can't do another article. This is crazy. You know, this is like a book. So that's how the first book came out. And that's how come I contacted Coast to Coast, the producer, very nice lady. And we talked for an hour. She was very skeptical. Didn't know who I was. Not that that matters, because it doesn't, it's not about me. It's, do you have the data? Do you really have that data? I said, yes, I'll send you the pictures, and I'll send you a sample of, the book. And can we at least talk about it? I mean, so after the show, actually before the show, they put up some of the, they always promo it with me, but also what are we talking about? And there was little pictures of the UFOs in Washington, D.C. Somebody saw that and sent me a picture that they inherited from their uncle, who was Air Force intelligence, who took pictures of them in 1947 of UFOs over the Pentagon on July 4th. So it was starting to snowball. And I mentioned all this on the show. It was the first time I ever talked to George, and we got along pretty well. But after the show, I started getting emails from people going, hey, where's the pictures? And I said, it's on the website. And they're like, no, it's gone. It's gone off of your website. It's still on Coast to Coast, a little bit that they put up, but your website is, somebody took the pictures off your website. So I go in there and I look. Now I'm a webmaster at that point. I went in there and I'm trying to upload and it wouldn't upload. So I called them the next day to the people that I'm contracting to host my website. I said, hey, I can't get in. And they said, hold on. The tech guy said, hold on. And he went and he goes, I can't get in there either. Somebody has locked us out of our server. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is bad news, man. It's just like, first it's a helicopter. Now we're dealing with this crap. I mean, a little stressful, just a little bit stressful, because I don't know who I'm pissing off, but somebody, well, I found out later, it was a software company in Herndon, Virginia, notorious for clandestine activity. So apparently that company sold them the software, and it had a back door and allowed them to go into the server and just basically shut them out. So I had to move my whole website over after that. I'm telling you that for a reason, because so I figured, okay, I don't even know what I'm doing to piss these people off. I thought it was free country, First Amendment, whatever. I thought, if this is real, can we at least talk about it? They're kind of in a quandary here, because they cannot officially, like we said before, they cannot officially come out and say, yes, this is real, because then all the questions that is going to come from people like, well, how long have you known this? And are they a threat? And all that. The implications are enormous, right? You can't just say, oh yeah, UFOs are real. Like, what do you mean? It's like being a little pregnant. You can't do that. So anyway, I wasn't planning on writing a second book. But what happened was, this is 2000, sometime in 2007, after the book was out, and it was what a lot of people were now. I thought they were paying attention, but I was finding more and more reports that I didn't include in the first book, and I thought was weird. It's like, how deep does this rabbit hole go? And I found, coincidentally, right, I broke the story in 2005, but Walt Disney had done a documentary about aliens. It was a promo for their ride in Disney World in Florida. And they did a little documentary, and in it had a few seconds of UFOs swarming or doing these weird maneuvers around the Capitol from 1952. And I thought, oh my God, let's get a copy of that. I'd actually found another copy. Nick Cook from Jane's Defense Weekly had done a documentary where there was color film of 1952 of them, the whole squadron kind of passing behind the Capitol. And that was that came out in England in 2005, I think it was. Also, yes, after I'd done my thing. So there was 95 and 2005, it was leaking out, it was leaking out. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I thought I was done. I called Disney. At the time I was living in Los Angeles, and I called over to their office and I said, I know you've got a copy out. They put me in touch with their entertainment attorney or some attorney. And I said, I understand you have a copy in your library, your archive over there in Burbank. May I see it? No. Okay. May I have a copy? No. Do you? And I said, why not? Well, it said, we don't know who owns it. I'm like, how is that even possible? How'd you get permission to use it if you don't even know who owns it? And I'd kind of gone over this with, not Bob Dean. It was the other guy, Colonel Wendell Stevens. He and I had a long conversation, which I included in my first book. And he had said that they basically confiscated all the cameras and film of the events of 1952. And there was way more than 2 or 3. I think it was more like 20 something that happened. That, yes, I know that was shocking to me too. But anyway, 2007, I'm on the phone with trying to get information or, a way to get a copy of this from Disney, and basically a brick wall. And as I'm on the phone, I'm hearing helicopters coming towards the house, way louder than the first time. So I said, okay, I got to go. I go outside. For some reason, I felt like I better go to the other side. I should have had my camera, but I was so freaked out. I'm like, no way. I go to the other side of the street to the neighbor's house, and I'm watching them. Now, this time there's 2 of them, and they've got the double rotors. These are big helicopters. The first one had a single rotor, which was loud enough. But when 2 of them came in tandem, they came in and they started doing a maneuver over my house and literally shaking the entire neighborhood. The whole air is just chop, 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 I was like, what in the hell are you guys doing? That is so freaking dangerous. Do something like that. If you're trying to intimidate me, congratulations. I damn near, wet myself. I was so freaked out by the sound, and it just didn't. I never thought in my wildest dreams that something like that would happen. Okay. And once again, I ran into the house and I got a picture of them as they were leaving. So just to document, I'm not making this up. I never would lie about something like that. That is just too weird and way too upsetting. Because at that point I said, basically F this stuff. I'm not getting anywhere. I don't need this kind of stress. And once again, thank God my wife and kid were not there, because I don't know, my wife might have threatened to divorce me because that was so scary. And
So I just wanted to kind of like
go ahead.
Go back to this issue of who was behind them, because I know,
Oh, right.
I know that the 1952 incident in Washington. In my research, I found kind of 2 explanations, and I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. One is that these were a group of extraterrestrials that were there to kind of like warn the United States, warn the Truman administration about going down the path of thermonuclear weapons and so forth.
Right.
And another group was saying that these were actually flying saucer craft from Antarctica that was belonging to a German secret space program, trying to put pressure on the US to negotiate. So, that 1952 incident, and then, you continuing to find evidence of flying saucers or craft over the Washington, D.C. area, and that being all covered up. And, you're definitely over the target. You're having helicopters come after you or kind of buzz you. So who did these craft belong to? Why were they trying to cover that up?
Yeah, it's impossible to say with any specificity, unfortunately. I'd love to be able to tell you, but again, we don't have a direct communication with whoever is making those things. We can speculate all day long, Michael. Believe me, I have, and others have, and there still are. It's a whole range of possible explanations. I think the better, simpler question is, are they hostile? Apparently not overtly. How are they getting into the controlled airspace? Well, that is part of the historic record, as well as the photographs that were taken in 2002. They are coming through wormholes, portals. And one of the photographs, the final photograph of that night, shows this jumping into a thing. There was also another one directly over the Capitol, and you can literally see something coming out of or into a portal. It's like a freaking hole in the sky. And inside is this luminous object, or maybe it's an individual. I don't know. I mean, that's the other thing. Are we talking about craft? Or are we talking about entities? Or maybe, obviously it could be both, but some of the way that they behave, that was weird. The photographer, he said they were entities. That's what he kept calling them. Obviously there's an intelligence behind them, but it's something that most people never even considered. Is like, angels supposedly can fly. If they're interdimensional, they're clearly coming in and out of between dimensions through these portals, windows, stargates. You call them whatever you want, but that's part of the historical record. Because when the pilots in 52, when the pilots they'd see them on radar or visual or both, and they'd come at them, they would just blink out. Well, they weren't gone. I mean, if they didn't just turn off the light, they were literally gone. And as soon as the aircraft returned to base, they would just pop right back out or into our reality. And that's a big problem. Again, I'm sure that's why disclosure isn't happening, because we're not a military parity with these craft. Not at all. I mean, I know we have advanced stuff. Clearly, some of that stuff is ours, and it's convenient for them to say it's unidentified. When damn well after all these years, they know what these things are more than we would know. We don't have a need to know. I'm just saying, unidentified aerial phenomena, that's what they're calling them now. That's not true. In my opinion, they know for sure, or at least they have a really good idea, because behind the scenes, they were doing a huge amount of analysis of these craft and the energy signature and the way that they're coming in and out, the way they interact with our aircraft, especially the military. There's a ton of data there that they could analyze and come to some conclusion, not to mention all the human intelligence that they gathered of people that are having contact. They do. Our government knows about that. Okay, they're acting like they don't, but I know they know. Anyway.
Well, this kind of brings me to more recent events, and you had an experience. I think it was March of last year or the year before, about being contacted by the Shining Ones again, and they asking for your help in dealing with the lower ranking Shining Ones. So,
right,
you want to tell us what happened there?
Yeah, that was 2020. Where are we? 2020, I think it was, maybe 21. Anyway, I don't know. It's kind of a blur to me because all these events kind of meld together in my mind. But yes, it was fairly recent. It was before Easter. I woke up and had a clear understanding that I'd had a conversation with them. And I know it wasn't just him, it was them, because they were asking me to ask everyone that I was reaching through modern media, meaning the internet and or conversations like this. I was doing a radio show at the time, and they said, we want you to ask everyone to ask us for assistance in dealing with the lower ranking or fallen angels. And my response was, okay, sure. And they said, just not so fast. If you do that, you're going to be kicked off the radio. And I thought, okay, so what? I mean, this is way more important than me being on a radio show. And they said, but if you're not careful, they're going to try and kill you. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's not good. I got a family, I don't, so I thought if as long as I'm careful, as long as I don't really just push too hard, because I've already had some experience with that. If you are an aggressor towards these entities, they will take it as an invitation to combat you. And that was made very clear to me. I don't need to be attacking them. I can expose them, I can oppose them, but I don't need to be an aggressor. I'm not here to condemn them. I'm just exposing the fact that they exist. And this is this is an ongoing conflict. And we really need help because in a way we are incapable. In other words, they have an advantage over us. Even the lower ranking ones have advantages over us for manipulating us and stuff like that. So I agreed to do it. I knew I made that agreement. And I told my wife when she woke up, I said, hey, look, I don't want to scare you. I'm just going to tell you straight out what happened. And I'm just going to proceed with caution, okay? Because to me, it sounds like a very simple request. I don't see how that could cause so much blowback. Well, that afternoon, I walked into, after lunch, I walked in, I looked at my bookshelf, and I saw a book that I'd picked up a year before and had not read because it was a novel. I'm not really into novels, but it was something about, it said angelology, and it caught my attention because I'd never heard that word before. I heard of demonology, and I'd read a lot about that, but I mean, angelology was new to me. So I pulled it off the thing and I started to read it, and I thought, wait a second, this is exactly what I just agreed to. I mean, summoning help from the higher angels to deal with the fallen ones. I mean, it's like right there. Yes, of course it was fictional, but I mean, what are the odds of that? It's a really funny way, the way they interact with us. Okay. It's not always very logical and straightforward the way we're having this conversation. So I showed my wife the book and she's like, oh my God. Oh my God. All right. So what are you going to do? Summon them? I said, not me. No. They're asking all of us to ask for their help in dealing with this problem because we're kind of caught in the middle. And now this is before so they obviously I passed some level of test competency because I was able to comprehend starting to comprehend it. Then it just was a deluge, a download of all this. I understood angelology is not a fictional thing. It's a real field of study. And I'm looking at all these books about it, and I'm digesting it. And I started to be able to then articulate more clearly as it's, why am I asking you to do this? Well, it's because there's a whole history, and most everybody like yourself would not see it as the fallen angels, but as the Anunnaki and that internal rebellion thing, that civil war, or however you want to call it, family feud. And as that happened in the process, yeah, there was a time that I was on the radio, we were talking about something, and someone specifically, who I won't name, I said he was being depicted as an angel, and I said, oh, a fallen, yeah, sure, a fallen angel. And apparently that pissed somebody off. They contacted the station. The manager says to me, Robert, we pulled that show out of our archives, and you cannot come back onto the air until you apologize for saying that. And understand, I'm friends with everybody at the station. This is not it was kind of shocking. They weren't trying to punish me. They were scared of being sued. All right. So I told my wife, I said, I need to do this. And she said, you cannot do that, because the next time you cross whatever that line is, they're going to pull the show again. They'll take that out of the archive, and they're going to ask you to apologize again. Are you just going to keep apologizing each time? I mean, do you see what a slippery slope that is? I'm like, okay, so, well, I guess what they told me came true, because it wasn't like, it was a mutual thing. I'm not going to apologize, and you're not going to let me on the air. So basically I'm off. That's it. I'm out. The reason I'm telling you that is because after that happened, I started thinking, oh crap, I know what comes next. They told me you're going to get kicked off the radio, and if you're not careful, you're going to get killed. I'm like, okay, because actually that was in the book Angelology. This was not fun and games at all. This was serious, like cloak and dagger stuff. And angels killing angels and people and everybody. I mean, it was like crazy James Bond stuff on a whole nother level. And I thought, man, I just need to step away from this. I need I need some time. So I just said, that's it. I'm done for a while. But I was still getting the information kept coming to me. They wanted me to be like a repository or someone that could have a way of summarizing, because it's so voluminous. This information is so deep and most people dismiss it. Well, I didn't. Believe me, I was taking this as serious as a heart attack. So I'm reading every day. I'm reading this, digesting it, sharing it with people. And that's ultimately how I came across that final book in a series by Mr. O'Brien called The Shining Ones. And at that point, I thought, well, this is next level. This has got to be a very high level angelology. It seems like for some reason, people in England know more about this than any other place on the planet. Have you noticed this at all?
Yeah, well, I think the English have a long history of the occult going back to Queen Elizabeth's
John
court.
John
Dee's, yeah. I mean, I think he set up the first military intelligence, or
right,
MI5
first 007. Yeah. And he supposedly had a way of communicating with these angels, whether they were fallen ones or not. I mean, we don't know. But I do think historically that some of the bloodlines there are directly related, more directly related. In England is not all of Britain. It's a small district, and it was called the land of the Angles, or the Anglos. Or I guess you could say it's Angle land.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, there's a connectivity there. And because most of the really high people, even Zachariah Sitchin, he was going to the London School of Economics. He was in the UK for quite a while before he came to New York and started writing. I'm trying to think, Lawrence Gardner, others. There's just so many, just all these people that right there that have had a huge influence on our understanding of these beings. Now, the latest thing though is absolutely beyond me. I'm having a hard time after this latest interview I did with Rex. It always happens like this. People hear me talking, so they contact me. And actually, if anybody wants to, I don't have a website right now, but if you want to contact me, I do have an email, which is unicuseditor@gmail.com. Unicus is spelled UNICUS. unicuseditor@gmail.com. If you write to me and you request any information that you heard here, or maybe something else we haven't discussed, I'll be happy to send that to you, because that's part of my mission, I guess you'd call it, is to share information without censorship or some personal agenda. That's really what I've been tasked to do, Michael. I know it sounds weird, but they do need intermediaries or emissaries to help kind of bring us up to speed on what's going on, because again, they're not interacting with us directly in the collective. Obviously, they do interact with us, some individuals.
So what would you say now, just in kind of bringing this interview to an end, to people who are listening and they're kind of wondering, well, here we are, October 2022, the end of that window, and we're on the verge of a nuclear war between NATO and Russia. So what would you say to people in terms of the Shining Ones having been in touch with you, asking for you to kind of like get the message out to a wider audience, asking for people to kind of like ask them for help,
right,
against the lower ranking ones, which we would call our deep state or the cabal,
yes,
that have just been kind of causing all these problems and are trying to create this nuclear war?
Yes, their motto is order from chaos. Yeah, and they're good at it, but it's bad for everybody. It's bad for all life. So that's and that's been raging for thousands of years here. And obviously it can be rectified, but because free will is a factor, this is why they wanted us to all be well-informed, and they amplified everybody's consciousness. And you notice that the secrecy, it's almost impossible to keep anything secret now, no matter how hard they tried. In fact, the harder that they tried, the more people become aware of it now. You know, so-called conspiracies or whatever you want to call it is now actually quite mainstream, meaning the general population, not the media, because they're still spinning. But the bottom line is that the dark side is real. And if we choose to go down that path, that's what we're going to experience. And if so is the force, the good side, the light side of life is there. The path of light is very real, and we can choose to do that. Now, at this point, the dualistic nature is so extreme, Michael. It's like the magnets are pushing each other so far apart. There has to be some sort of separation. And again, this is why they've been asking us to ask them for help, but also to make a choice. We have to make a choice. They cannot make that choice for us. Which side do we want to participate in? They will respect our free will. There is, as far as I know, free will up to a point is part of who we are. It's part of the process that allows us to keep growing. So as far as it's always going to look bad, but it looks worse now because if you think about what I said, all consciousness is being raised. That's the dark side as well as the light. That's why things have gotten increasingly, I mean, relatively speaking, it looks worse than ever, but it's just because they're desperate to retain control over as many of us as possible. And they know that they're running out of time to do that. So they're trying to accelerate a lot of their contingency plans to keep us under control. They call it the Great Reset. I call it the not so great reset, or some people call it a satanic reset because it is very much profane. On the flip side of that most people are not talking about or are unaware of, and what I am promoting is a divine reset, which the benevolent Anunnaki will assist in implementing for those that choose it. Now, whether that's on this world or some other place is unknown to me. Do they have the capability? Yes, for sure they do. They have. It's been actually in the book, The Shining Ones, it says in their language, which I believe is called Maon, that's their language. What they speak to us is Maku, but in their language, they talk about a scientist is either a one-eyed scientist or a two-eyed scientist, and they're called serpents. Don't ask me why, but this is according to the book, The Shining Ones. So the one-eyed scientist or serpent is unaware of the level of information and technology of the two-eyed serpent. So the higher ranking Anunnaki have abilities that are far beyond those of the lower ranking ones. Okay, so we could call it technology, but if you don't understand it, you call it magic. It's a process. It's not based on superstition or ritual. It's a process, just like any other scientific process. But the level of our understanding of quantum physics and other things, these multiple dimensions, is going to accelerate greatly as we interact with the benevolent ones. But there is a prerequisite there, and that's what you heard me talking to Rex about. And I actually sent you some books about, kind of give you just a glimpse of what is a master. What does a higher ranking Anunnaki look like or act like? And it's, well, benevolent for one, loving, sure, loving, but their abilities or capabilities are much greater than what we think of, what we currently understand. Again, it looks like they're performing miracles or magic, and it's actually a manipulation that they're doing from a benevolent place, their sacred heart, their soul, right? And that is permitted. That level of manipulation is benevolent, so it's permitted. They literally become like co-creators. That's why we call them gods, because they can manipulate the subatomic particles, the field, the source. But if you are on the lower end, first of all, you wouldn't even know about that technique. And if you did, you wouldn't be permitted. It would just it's like a circuit breaker. You basically destroy yourself before you could go out there and, let's say, use that same process to manipulate for evil intent or deeds. You know, it would collapse on itself like an avalanche. So I'm telling you this because the future is going to be, for some of us who choose it, is going to be even better than we can imagine right now, because we're so inundated by these distractions. You know, every day they keep telling us to be afraid, prepare for the worst and all that stuff. That's not what I'm focused on. I'm aware of it. Yes, I'm not stupid, but I'm also focused on the divine reset, how that can happen, how we can participate in that if we so choose. It's not that difficult, but I'll close with this. It begins with loving yourself, truly loving yourself. Part of that is to forgive yourself for all, because we're not perfect. We're in a state of becoming, okay? If you don't love yourself, you cannot love your neighbor, and you cannot love God fully. So this is something that Jesus allegedly had said. What is the most important commandments? And he said 2 things: love your neighbor like you love yourself, and you love God with all your heart, soul. There's a piece missing in there, which is what I told you. Preface it this way: if you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor, and you can't love God, because your heart is not open. I don't mean your physical heart. Your sacred heart, your soul, is the doorway that connects to all of creation. Okay, so it's not that difficult, but it does take effort. We definitely need to work on it, to focus while there's time. And that's why I came back. I'm building another website so that we can ultimately not only share this information, Michael, but we need to get off of these platforms. We're not designed for this. I think the goal is to move from the digital to the physical to the spiritual. We need to come together collectively on a soul level. And there's only one way to do that I'm aware of, and it's going to start with coming together, like congregate, not religious, but spiritually connecting on a heart level, really loving ourselves and loving each other. And that'll draw in not only the angels, but the presence of God. And with that will be truly a divine reset.
I think that's a great way to end the show.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you, Robert, for really giving us such an extensive overview of your background and, of course, the role of the shining ones, the Anunnaki, in modern day society.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael, for having me.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.